Hello, I'm Matt Kelly.
And I'm Matt Dancona.
And this is the Two Matts for the week ending Friday, the 14th of June. The podcast where politics and culture intersect.
They do.
They did actually this week, didn't
they? They did, and in the form, not after a chat about where we are in the election, in the form of a really interesting interview with Dylan Jones, the editor-in-chief of the Evening Standard, who's just published his memoir, which is a terrific book.
These Foolish Things.
These Foolish Things. And we really dealt with some fascinating subjects.
We did. It gets very deep at one point.
It gets very deep,
yeah.
but also, he's someone who's seen the culture shift from the late 70s to the present. So it's well worth listening to.
It's a remarkable conversation.
It really is.
Look forward to that in the second half. But the first half is a précis of the fast-paced general election campaign.
It's
cock-up after cock-up.
Just
evasion after evasion.
Evasion after evasion.
Right, so anyway, this is the Two Matts, episode 53. Enjoy. So, Matt, very interesting debate on Sky TV last night. We're recording this Thursday.
Yes, well, there were two things, actually. First of all, there was Paul Brand of ITV's interview with Rishi Sunak, which was, the thing he did when he should have been...
Paul Brand has got the eyes of a great white shark, hasn't he?
He is scary. I don't want him to interview me ever. Admirable journalist. Which, of course, is what Rishi Sunak rushed back from D-Day with the great political wisdom that he has so often displayed to do.
For being late.
And then after that, that was recorded, but then live was Beth Rigby brilliantly.
She was great,
interviewing both Sunak and Keir Starmer. And I thought that maybe if producer Matt can give us a blast of first of all Sunak in the ITV interview, and then Keir Starmer talking about their deprived backgrounds.
Yes.
What did you go without as a child?
We went out with lots of things, right? Because my parents wanted to put everything into our education, and that was a priority.
So what sort of things had to be sacrificed?
Lots of things, right?
Can you give me an example
all
of
sorts of things. So, like lots of people, there'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Mm-hmm. Famously, Sky TV. Okay. So that was something that we never had growing up, actually.
Except I earn a lot of money in the job I am now in. But when I grew up, my dad was a tool maker. He worked in a factory. It's true. My mum was a nurse, and actually we couldn't make ends meet, which actually isn't a laughing matter. We couldn't make ends meet. We couldn't pay our bills. I know what it feels like to feel anxious about the next bill, which you can't pay.
Now, it's a bit unfair to juxtapose the two, because actually I think Starmer's upbringing was occasionally quite straitened. But there is a bit of a Monty Python Four Yorkshiremen dimension to this, isn't it?
It was weird, though, how he missed because Starmer's been making gags about the fact that he goes on about the toolmaker thing all the time. I mean, he's been making self-deprecating gags about it. And I think that's what the audience were laughing at.
Yes.
And it was weird that he seemed to miss that beat. He bridled, he took offence and said, well, it's no laughing matter. I thought it was very strange. And the only reason I could think of was that Beth Rigby had absolutely put him under the most intense pressure he's experienced in this campaign to date, and he squirmed.
I agree with that, but I think there's a sort of broader issue here about relatability and I feel your pain. Never say I feel your pain unless you actually have.
Yeah.
Now I think Starmer has, but it's a long time ago, and he's lived ever since quite a comfortable existence, and we know his dad was a toolmaker and his mum was a nurse, and I think that the important thing is, do you have the values that are going to change and the policies that are going to change those that are genuinely needy? And I also think not having a PlayStation or Sky TV does not count as not having enough food or not having a house.
It doesn't trigger the deprivation checklist.
No, and I it's a dangerous game to go down when you're... I wouldn't have tried at all, and I think it just shows Sunak's terrible political judgment again. But there we go.
That would be my assessment as well, is that I couldn't care less whether he had Sky TV or not, but
obviously.
What I can care less about is he hasn't got the wit to tell Paul Brand, who, to be fair, is staring at him like a Gestapo interrogator. Absolutely cold-eyed.
No.
But why didn't he just say, Paul, move on. This has got nothing to do with anything. I'm a very rich man, but you're telling me I can't create policy to try and lift society up. Come off it.
I mean, Cameron had a pat slogan, I remember, when this question was asked of him, which was, it's not where you come from, it's where you're going to, which is, of course, not true.
Yeah.
Where you come from makes an enormous difference in this country. But at least it had the honesty of not trying to conceal the fact that he was extremely privileged. And he did talk about his privilege.
Yeah.
And I remember even talked about redistributing privilege, which, again, is meaningless, but it had a kind of...
you sort of know what he meant.
You knew what he meant.
Yeah.
But I mean, this idea that because Sunak spent a certain number of hours in a pharmacy, he knows what it's like to work down a mine, is really, really not a good strategy.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about the topic that Beth Rigby nailed Starmer on? And Starmer looked like a rabbit between the headlights because she relentlessly went at him about Jeremy Corbyn and his record for pledging things that he's then ditched later. And I thought that Keir Starmer came over as really quite evasive and panicky in his answers. The weirdest element of it, though, was this thing about the 2019 election, wasn't it? It was just odd, where he said, I knew we weren't going to win that election. So I felt, and the implication being, it was okay to say that Jeremy Corbyn would make a great prime minister because he was confident that Jeremy Corbyn was never going to get the opportunity. And I was trying to rattle my brains thinking, what kind of defence is this? Well, he's basically saying it was okay to lie because I knew that nothing would come of it.
Don't worry, I was being dishonest.
Yeah. But about something that wasn't going to be consequential.
But it was it was extremely consequential. And of course, there's an easy way to answer it, which is, look, it should be clear by now, given what's happened between me and Jeremy, that we never really saw eye to eye. But the one thing I was absolutely certain of was that Boris Johnson would continue to be a disastrous prime minister for the country. And so I stood with my party, and I stood with my party leader. And I think what Boris Johnson then went on to do proved that, let's face it, it's been a disastrous 5 years.
Yeah.
Was Jeremy Corbyn my kind of Labour leader? I think it's clear he wasn't. Yeah. But he was a Labour leader.
That's right. And to say
move on.
The Labour Party's a team like any other team. And if we've got disagreements, we don't go out and say air the dirty laundry in public, although that's obviously how things ended up.
They did,
but, we keep it in the dressing room. And but he didn't do any of that. It seemed a very strangely unprepared response to what was an obvious opening question, I thought.
I think that it also indicates that his gang, Starmer's gang, remain disproportionately mesmerised and concerned by Corbyn.
Yeah.
They have to, if they're going to govern well, they cannot be constantly relitigating that messy breach.
Yeah.
So I wasn't impressed by that.
Do you think does any of this move the needle on the dial? No.
I think, my feeling increasingly is that this election was decided in 2022.
After Liz Truss.
The combination of Partygate, which put the final nail. I mean, there is more nail than coffin now, isn't there? Put the final nail in the coffin of Tory trust, what little there was left of it, and then the absolute thunderbolt of the Truss mini budget, which sort of put an end to any last traces of Tory economic competence. And I think at that point, if not before, the country just said, we've had enough for you.
And so there was a poll, wasn't there, that was reported on the Today programme about how absolutely wiped out public's trust in politicians is.
Yes.
Does that extend to Keir Starmer, do you think?
Yes. One of the hardest things for progressive parties is that populism erodes and corrodes public trust. And progressive parties need it disproportionately because they do stuff.
Yeah.
Populists don't need trust. They thrive on its absence.
Yeah.
They're all about conspiracies and enemies and blame and attribution. But progressive parties that want you to believe that government can make life better need trust. So this is a huge problem, and not just for Starmer, for progressive parties all over the world. Yeah. Anyone who cares about politics and democracy should be very worried about it.
And the problem, as we've discussed before, is that from day one, if Keir Starmer's Labour Party wins a big majority, and the Tories are reduced to a rump, then the Tory party are going to start splintering massively. Nigel Farage, with a decent reform performance, will be emboldened. And Keir Starmer will be on the defensive from these people from the word go, won't he?
He will. And, you know, the supermajority idea that is rather pathetically being sort of mooted this week by the Tories, Grant Shapps in particular. You can't give the Labour a supermajority because they'll do all sorts of terrible things and turn us into a communist state. Is really desperate stuff, I think. But it does have it does contain one truth, which is if Starmer does get a huge majority, the public will correctly say, well, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
From day one.
Yeah.
You know, if he gets, I think Blair got 179. Let's say he gets 200. I don't know. I really don't know. It's quite possible. You know, that means that you can do more or less what you want. So the public will say, "We'll do it."
Yeah.
From July the 5th.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I was reading in the FT about how John Major in '97 kept hold of, although obviously he got completely wiped out as you've just described, but he kept hold of between 60 and 70% of people who'd voted Conservative in the previous election.
Yes.
Starmer's on track to keep hold of about 45% of those people. So the Conservatives' base, even though the result might look the same in that kind of order of magnitude, 200-seat majority or thereabouts, the Conservatives are in much more trouble than they were in '97.
Oh, I think they're in elemental trouble. It's interesting because, of course, naturally, as the last few weeks of the campaign approach and with the Labour manifesto today, Thursday, the focus is on Starmer, but really this debate, this election is about getting rid of the Tories. You know, it really is. And it's also about the end of something, which is one of the I found very dispiriting about the campaign is the way that it's been, the Tories are still propagating the Labour's going to raise taxes by 2,000 quid lie. And so they're saying we're going to raise taxes, and Labour are saying we're not going to raise taxes. And Sunak at his manifesto launch was invoking Nigel Lawson and Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
And I think that the idea that this is a low versus high tax election is absolutely beyond ridiculous. It's not low versus high tax. It should be about broken versus fixed.
Yeah.
You know, the public are not interested particularly. I mean, look, everyone is interested in the tax they pay, of course. But the big issue is nothing working. And actually, even if you hear the politicians doing in the spin rooms or on interviews talking about what people are talking about on the doorstep, it's about things not working, not being able to get an appointment, no dentistry, social care falling to pieces, border control, whichever side of the fence you stand on that issue being a joke.
Yeah.
This country is not functioning. And so the idea that the heart of the election debate should be whether or not Labour is going to raise capital gains tax or not is hilariously feeble.
That's right.
And I think what is worrying about it is that what we've already seen today in the various interventions by Labour, even before the manifesto launch, but then including it, was they're betting everything on growth. Like there's a magic growth tree.
Yeah.
You know, talking about 1.5 million houses over 5 years, infrastructure. They say that stability, they'll deliver stability, which will lead to massive private investment. Decentralization will lead to growth, and so on and so on. Well, that may be true, but growth, even when you're really, really going for it, is very slow to come.
Yeah.
And so I personally think it's a dangerous way to kind of present yourself to the public as don't worry about tax and don't worry about borrowing because there's going to be so much growth.
Yeah, I think there's scope. I think they're storing up a problem for themselves, Labour, because, you know, in that Sky TV debate, Beth Rigby again pushed him about tax raises, and Keir Starmer kept saying there's nothing in the manifesto that will require tax, and she correctly said, yes, but are you ruling out any tax rises, full stop? And he wouldn't answer it. He said, no, there's nothing in the manifesto. Now, people aren't stupid.
Of course they know what that means.
They're listening to that. Or they're certainly thinking, well, what does he mean? You know, why does he keep saying there's nothing in the manifesto? Because they know there's a caveat there. And so Keir Starmer clearly has budgeted in his head, well, you know, if there's a disaster or something, the growth doesn't materialise, there's got to be a plan B, and plan B will have to involve raising taxes. But he's now put in people's head that he said for the duration of his first parliament, there'll be no tax rises, and he might well have to raise taxes.
He will, certainly, unless he's willing to go down a pretty dangerous borrowing path. Yeah. I thought one of the better answers he delivered was to a guy in the audience who stood up and said, I pay school fees at private school, and I'm very worried I won't be able to continue to keep my kid at this private school because of the VAT on fees, right?
Yeah.
And Starmer basically gave an honest answer, which was, I hear you, got nothing against private schools in principle, but they presently have a tax break, which is not fair when state schools are as underfunded as they are. And I'm sorry if this has an impact upon you, but we're citizens, not islands. And it was an effective.
He said I'm interested in everybody's education.
Yes, and that's right. You know, and I wish he would say that to other people who are going to have to, who will eventually have to pay tax.
Mind you, Rishi Sunak tried a moment of honesty and it backfired horrifically when he singled out the junior doctor in the audience.
Oh, that was terrible.
And basically said, well, if it was, I heard there was a junior doctor asked a question before. If it wasn't for their strike, the waiting lists would be coming down in the NHS.
Yes. Basically
tried to pin the NHS problems on the guy in the background.
No, it was the
audience hated that, didn't they?
Well, rightly so.
Yeah.
I can't remember which of the two debates it was in that Sunak tried to pose as having a terrible diet.
He said she said at the end, she said, tell us something that will endear you to the list. And he went, I eat lots of sugar, loads of Haribos.
People seem to have this idea that I'm very fit because of the fasting that I do. And he said,
it's like he's in the room.
He said, I eat a lot of Haribo and a Twix. And I just thought, maybe you do, right?
Yeah.
But what it comes across as, yet again, because he's just such a clusterfuck of a politician, right?
Totally.
Is someone has done a memo, could you do me a memo on what chavs eat, right? So, and it says Twix, fried Mars bars.
What don't they have? Sky TV.
Lard. It was a catastrophic moment because this sort of stick thin Silicon Valley type prime minister we have, claiming that he's got a bit of a sweet tooth. In
the interests of equality, we should also mention Keir Starmer said at one point to the Grimsby audience here in Hull, and as James Ball, our political editor, rightly tweeted in real time, said, I can't tell you how insulting that is to the people of Grimsby and to the people of Hull.
Yes.
But if it wasn't for the fact that Keir Starmer is up against this walking disaster, this Buster Keaton of politics, that would have got more attention.
I mean, actually, I keep thinking we've hit bottom with Sunak, but no, I mean
there's a Marianas Trench to go to yet.
It's like James Cameron's The Abyss. We just keep going lower and lower.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that he's intelligent enough, I think, to know, at least intuit, that he's just done another stupid thing. You can see it in his face. When he gave the Twix answer, he smiled pallidly, and you could see that he knew deep down that it was the wrong answer.
As he did with the Sky TV.
I like crisps,
But there's his problem in a nutshell, isn't it? He hasn't got the wit to evade the question. I mean, he must be sitting there wondering, just how fucked am I? Because obviously you're not going to be Prime Minister, mate. You're going to be job hunting in August.
Yes.
Are people going to be looking at Rishi Sunak thinking, this guy's just an idiot?
Well, that's a really good point, I think, because most defeated opposition leaders or prime ministers come out with a measure of dignity, and there's a sort of there's a piece that one can almost write from memory, which was nothing became him like the leaving blah, blah, blah of it. If only he'd shown this dignity before and all that stuff. And then 2 months later, he goes off and works for Elon Musk or Peter Thiel or Facebook. Exactly. Nick Clegg led the Lib Dems to catastrophic defeat in 2015 for having been in government, and is now one of the most influential people in the world of tech. But you're right. I mean, Sunak is prime minister, and if he does lead the Conservative Party to a super defeat, mega defeat, he'll not be I mean, I doubt he'll want for work, right? People like him never do. But you're right. Having Rishi Sunak on your board will suddenly cease to be quite as attractive as it might have.
As shiny as one might hope, is it?
No. And the other thing about him, of course, is that Boris Johnson makes a lot of money because he's entertaining.
Yeah.
So, in the first few months after he left Downing Street, he earned £6 million
Jesus,
on the on the speakers trail, because people like, especially American businessmen, love to have sort of P.G. Wodehouse, the love child of P.G. Wodehouse and Nietzsche, telling them jokes. Yeah. But I mean, who is going to pay to hear Rishi Sunak talk about working in a pharmacy?
Nobody.
I mean, what rate? It's interesting, isn't it?
Nobody.
Because the rate can plummet.
Yeah.
From
over to Liz
$1
Truss
million
levels.
down to, well, I mean, that's the moment, isn't it? When you cross over, they're all worried about when a reform going to be polling more than the Tories.
Yeah.
What Rishi should be worried about is when is his speaker's fee going to fall below Liz Truss's?
Who's just on free drinks and crisps.
I would say by next week's podcast, we may be in that terrain.
Well,
it's funny.
It's all entertainment.
But he's at the G7 today. Thursday.
He is.
With
is he going to leave that early?
With I think he thinks the G7's proper, you see, because they have spreadsheets.
He'll stay for that.
Calculators and things.
Yeah.
And also he's crazy about Giorgia Meloni, who's hosting it.
Yeah.
As indeed half of Europe is at the moment.
Yeah.
She's very.
Well, we should do a
special on her.
We should do a podcast. Maybe next week we should talk about European right-wing politics.
Because I mean, she's not a good thing, but she's a very very important figure.
It's a phenomenon. So let's stick with the entertainment value theme in the second half, because we are speaking to
the great Dylan Jones.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So join us in the second half for some really good chat. So welcome back, and we are delighted to be joined by Dylan Jones, the editor-in-chief of the London Evening Standard. Is it still the London Evening Standard or just the Evening Standard?
Evening Standard.
Evening Standard, and former GQ editor.
22 years.
Amazing, yeah.
I suppose I should say at the top, for reasons of transparency, that I write a fortnightly column for Dylan Standard.
So you won't be asking any tough questions.
Whether I'll still be writing one in 20 minutes' time is up for debate. And
also wrote extensively for GQ when I was there,
and enjoyed it very much, being a contributor editor. It was a great. Actually, it was a very wonderful gang, which is something we might talk about in context of the book.
The book is why we're here.
Publication date. This book, These Foolish Things, memoir by Dylan Jones, which I finished on Sunday night.
You did,
Congratulations!
I hope you slept well.
I stayed up late to read it, and it is a really excellent book
because it's quite chunky as well, isn't it?
Yeah, but you don't feel kind of oppressed by it. It's a proper page turner, and I'd recommend it to all of our devoted listeners.
Thank you.
Why did you write it, Dylan?
At my agent's behest. Right. No, seriously. I tend to write a book a year, and they're books about pop culture. And whenever I've used personal experiences, they are relevant to the subject matter. But I had no interest in writing an autobiography. None. In fact, I gave pushback for about 3 or 4 months, and then Gordon said, no, this is the time to do it. And actually, I did at the same time remember what my previous agent, dear departed Ed Victor, said to me once. He said that most people leave their memoir too late because they think by writing it signals the end of something.
Right.
So I wrote it. I spent a long time writing it. And then I gave it to 5 people to read. I gave it to my editor. I gave it to the editor, Andreas at Little Brown, who bought it, my agent, and also to my wife and my kids and my 2 daughters. And they all said the same thing. They said, you've got to make it more personal.
Right.
Because I think what I'd done is basically rattled through my career. And actually, I found it interesting. There was a friend of mine who you saw, Alan Edwards, who says, hello, I just spoke to him in the car. He sent his best to you.
Uh-huh.
He gave me an early version of his excellent book to read. And I said, it's great, but it's a collection of anecdotes. And I said, the person that you meet at the end needs to be a very different person from the person you're introduced to at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And as I said that, I realized that I kind of hadn't done that with my book. It needed a strong personal narrative rather than just being a collection of stories.
Yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing about it, and there was a lot in it that was fascinating just in terms of the events as well as your reflections on them was that it's a Life and Times book, like all best memoirs are. And, you know, you were part of a generation of magazine writers and then editors who were protagonists in this cultural moment, well, decades really, which is fascinating. And what's so interesting is that you can see in the book things being prefigured. So, for example, you're talking about David Bowie, who's someone you've written about, you know, written the definitive biography, you've written another book about him, you know, he's been very much part of your writing and your journalism. And you say, it was a lovely sentence, for my generation, Bowie acted like Google. And then later on, you say of ID, which was, sort of, I guess, the first of your magazines where you're editing as well as writing, it was Instagram on paper. And it's like a huge amount of what we now take for granted about what we call social media, celebrity culture, and so on, was being birthed as you were starting out your career.
Well, it was our iteration of it, but
Yeah.
I don't think what we were doing was any different in terms of structure than the things that people were doing in the 60s or the 70s. It was the third iteration of Swinging London.
Yeah.
But I think you're right, because when we were at ID, we were a conceited bunch, I think, and we very much knew that as well as reporting about Swinging London, we were part of it. And it even sounds conceited saying it now, but it was true. And we kind of knew that, and I think that propelled us. And I think it gave the magazine and the whole energy around the magazine a certain kind of halo at the time, in the same way that people at the Face probably felt very, very similar.
Yeah. And you started at Chelsea School of Art and then St Martin's. And as so often, it's amazing how art schools are at the heart of these movements.
Sure.
Which aren't necessarily art to do with figurative art, although design was clearly at the heart of what you were doing. Tell us a bit about that milieu, that because the book starts with a description of your halls of residence.
Well, all I ever really wanted to do in life was go to art school. So by the time I got to art school, I kind of ran out of things to do. Because for me, and I think like a lot of people who are in the suburbs or even further away than that, and I come from a forces background, so
because your dad was in the RAF.
Yeah, so there's a constant change anyway. Plus, I was almost a Londoner because I was conceived in London and left London almost on the day I was born.
Yeah.
So I was always sort of drawn to the city, and coming to London and that kind of escape is a very traditional, well-worn route, I think, for lots of people still. Even more so then because it was unnatural, it was unusual. Now everyone goes to college. Back then, hardly anyone went to college, and it really did feel special.
Yeah.
But again, like a lot of people, I wanted to go there for the milieu, as you say, for the kind of the atmosphere, the environment, the people, not just what I was studying.
And though punk was obviously the music of the moment, what you make very clear is that it was all a lot more eclectic than that, actually. You know, you talk about walking along the corridor in your hall of residence, and you know all the music.
It was like a jukebox. You walk along it was a place called Ralph West Halls of Residence in Battersea, in Albert Bridge Road, and you'd walk along any corridor, and you'd have the Beach Boys coming out from under one door, Tapazuki, the Ramones, Genesis, the Second Side of Low, etc., etc., etc. And I describe it in the book as I used to spend all my time going out to clubs in London, often by myself, to the 100 Club, the Red Cow, Roxy, Hope and Anchor. But then I'd get back to the halls of residence and I'd play Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and all the stuff I wasn't meant to like, because I didn't want to relinquish that.
Yeah.
You know, that was still an important part of my life, and it also for me it was about discovery. Because through music, in the same way that at that impressionable age, you're reading literature and seeing films, it transports you and it basically shows you other ways of living, and it excites you and propels you.
Absolutely.
When you, most people will know you as the editor of GQ, which you, 22 years?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
And
man and boy.
I mean, without blowing smoke, you created a really distinct, high quality magazine that covered a whole breadth of content, but had a thread running through it of masculinity, really, and what it meant to be a man. Like you had Tony Parsons, really writing brilliantly about machismo in many ways. You had Alistair Campbell, Piers Morgan, Matt. You had all these people with a take on it.
And you.
And I wrote occasionally for you as well. And I wonder how did that element, and I'd like to talk about what's happened to GQ after you've left as well, which is a less happy topic. But I wonder, how did you craft that magazine? When you came to it, it wasn't like that. How did that process develop?
I made a decision that because the job was in play, and it seemed like a bit of there was an expectation that I was going to do this job. And actually, having done a men's magazine before, I didn't think I particularly wanted to do it.
Which was Arena, yeah.
And I was having a great time at the Sunday Times, lots of freedom. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to go back to the world of cufflinks and shoe trees, So, but then I describe it as a bit like you hear that a girl's interested in you, and you think, oh, I'm not really that bothered. Then you find out she might be interested in someone else. You go, hold on a minute, hold on a minute. And I kind of grabbed it, and I thought, this is a great opportunity to do something special and to try and I did. I was slightly cheeky because I kind of bended the publication to what I wanted to do, and it happened to be a men's magazine.
Yeah.
Luckily, it was a very successful one, and it was a kind of a yuppie Bible, and it was really well supported by advertising, had a big circulation, but it was narrow in scope, and it didn't particularly, I think, have great journalistic ambitions. So I thought, we can do anything. We can do pop, we can do politics, we can do fashion, we can do anything we want to. And then I started basically building it, built the team, built the contributors, got the very best people that we could afford, which turned out to be everybody.
Yeah.
Because we started paying more than most people in Fleet Street.
Just give people an idea. What at the top end of GQ in its heyday under you?
Yeah.
What would be the top kind of fee you would pay a
I
writer?
can't say that because
Give us a ballpark. Give us an idea.
Can't possibly say that.
I know
it would offend too many people.
I know what you paid me.
Exactly.
I'm pretty sure that wasn't the top end.
And that's what we paid. And that's what we paid.
There you go. How much to get Matt Kelly to get out of bed in the morning.
What would
there was
several thousands of
There
pounds,
was one instance. There were occasions where I wanted something so badly I prepared to pay for it, and I'm not talking about sex. There was a column that I wanted Rachel Johnson to write. It was her suggestion. We were having lunch one day, and she said, I want to write a column called Hung Like a Donkey. Right.
Okay.
And it was about notable men who had large genitalia. And I thought it was tremendously funny. And she suddenly got kind of bashful, which is very un-Rachel. And this went on for quite some time. And each time we'd have lunch, I'd sort of offer her a bit more money to write it, until it got to I was offering her, a lot of money, probably like £6,000 or £7,000 to write this very short, very funny piece. And she wouldn't do it. And I thought it was funny because it's the kind of thing you're never going to be. It's impossible to libel someone.
Yeah.
Someone is not going to call up and say,
"Excuse me."
I've been accused of
have you know? I have a penis.
Exactly. Yeah. Tintin.
Tintin.
But she didn't do it. But occasionally there were, and
well, it's early yet.
there were some people who I paid more for. They would tend to be Americans, people like Michael Wolff. But we paid most people pretty well.
Yeah. And what was that like as an editor then, when you'd established this thing in your image pretty much? You were really influential within London, weren't you? Invited to every single party, every opening, every jaunt.
Lots of people
high energy stuff though, no? I don't know where you get the energy to do all of that stuff.
It was intoxicating, but as I hope I make clear in the book, that wasn't the reason for doing it. And also, a lot of that stuff I didn't do anyway. And I described going to some extraordinary parties and dinners with people. And I do make the point that if I'd wanted to, I could have done that every night of the week. But I didn't want to.
Some people do, though, don't they?
Some people do, which is great. But I think it involves, it's not stamina, and it isn't just curiosity. Eventually you get sucked into a world which is just a load of world of, oh, hi, oh, you're here, fantastic. And it's just a giddy social world.
Dylan, what happened at the end of GQ? Because I mean, I was a subscriber to GQ, and I remember, obviously, it was a bit of a shock when you went. I don't know the circumstances precisely, but when you went, and then the subsequent issues of GQ, there was a precipitous plummeting in what I would describe as the kind of inherent quality of that magazine. It seemed to lose its soul overnight.
Well, lots of people said that. I couldn't comment, but I think it's what happened very simply was Condé Nast used lockdown as a kind of vehicle for restructuring the entire company. So everything is run from New York now. They have very small satellite companies in various countries around the world, and that's their model. And I can't say whether that's a good model or a bad model. It's just different, but it's got nothing to do with me now. And I don't. I had a fantastic time there, and the last thing I do is go around and belittle my previous employer, because I had a brilliant time, and they're doing something else now, and
so are you,
and so am I. Yeah.
Can I ask you about culture? Because Culture. Well, it was like it was a bit where you're in the book where you're talking about your period working on newspapers as a writer, mainly editor at large, and so on. And you say, I knew it was culturally normative to treat culture as incidental, or peripheral. This is newspapers at the time.
Yeah.
And the central proposition of the book, and a through line to now, was that was wrong, and culture was actually now at the heart of everything. And,
correct.
10 years, 20 years later, you'd have proto-Trumpites saying culture is upstream from politics. Yeah. And I just wonder how that's been for you, because, when you were starting as a culture /design /style journalist, writing about all forms of things, including politics, which I think was interesting that you were drawn to politics as part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Then watching culture turn into this kind of huge global encompassing phenomenon that varied from Donald Trump to social media in a way that was frankly inconceivable in the mid-80s.
Mm-hmm.
How's that been?
I think that, I suppose, it's generational. The book isn't just my story; it's a story
of. My point, really,
it's a story of that period.
Yeah,
not in isolation, obviously. And the world has changed, and I think that I try to show that in London and the UK and in these particular streams of culture and entertainment, they developed in a particular way. But it is generational, and that's because of people, because of people in this room and the people slightly older than us and the people slightly younger than us who have come through that funnel and respond to things in different ways. So, and also the fact that eventually you become in charge.
Yeah.
When I was 17,
true.
The only thing I was in charge of was myself, and I wasn't particularly in charge of that.
Yes.
Whereas now we are in charge of channels of media. And the interesting thing is now that everyone is because of social media.
Yes.
So it has changed again.
So, because if you take America now, the two most influential people you could argue are the former presenter of the Celebrity Apprentice and the former presenter Joe Rogan of The Fear Factor. Now, if you'd said in 2000 that by 2024 that would be the case, people would have laughed you out of court. But I suppose what I'm driving at is that the world that you were present at the creation is what I'm really saying. A world where culture was not just the culture section. It was actually...
Sure.
It started to seep everywhere.
And I think the issue now is that then it was very easy to say, I know about this, it's this big, and I'm clever because you don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And these days, that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Because everything is atomized, and everything that gets traction is suddenly owned by everybody. So I think the interesting thing now is finding a way through that. And you could say that as a sort of cultural adjudicator, as we all like to think of ourselves as, that position is more important now than it was 30 or 40 years ago, 50.
So building on that, you talk about both in the book, but I'm interested in what your reflections are sort of for 2024, the wallop of Me Too in 2017, and then the hammer blow of George Floyd's murder in 2020, and the protests that followed, and Black Lives Matter and so on. you're squarely in the centre of all this.
Yeah.
Because you're editing magazines that write about this sort of thing all the time, and representational issues are key.
Yes.
And, GQ in its past has, before you took it over, had been a lad's mag, and it was very much not that by the time these things happened. But how did you deal with those two cultural phenomena, and how do you deal with them now?
When discussing this subject, I always think of an interview that was in the New York Times, and it was an interview with Tim Robbins, the actor and activist, obviously, because they're an actor. And the subject of the interview was basically about Tim Robbins' relationship with Harvey Weinstein, because obviously Miramax had been a big supporter of the kind of films that he'd been involved with. And I can't remember whether it was the interviewer or Tim Robbins who said this, but they were referencing a Martin Amis quote, where Amis sort of uncharacteristically said, political correctness, you can criticize political correctness any way you like, but the important thing about political correctness is that it changes us. I am more tolerant than my parents, and my parents were more tolerant than their parents. And that's the only important thing. Yeah. So regardless of the kind of the backsplash of all these things
and the side debates,
they are fundamental improvements to our culture.
Yeah, I think there was a GQ Men of the Year I attended where there were more female recipients than male. It felt like a big, and maybe I'm wrong, but it certainly felt at least half and half.
Well, it sounds very self-aggrandizing, but that was actually before all of that happened.
Before, was it?
And I think I suppose, right from the off, because I inherited a very, very successful title that had paid lip service to lad culture, it would have been suicidal for me to walk in and go, we're not going to do that anymore. You had to change things gradually. And I look back now, and I think we changed things pretty quickly, but we were already moving as fast as we could, but quite slowly, away from that culture. You just had to do it in ways that didn't scare the horses. So actually, I think lots of things that we've done and I've done, we've been the beneficiary of the culture that we're in. In that instance, I was driving that because that's what I wanted to do, because I thought that was the thing to do. You move up market and you become more sophisticated and you move away from that. And we were right, because we lasted and they all collapsed.
It's in no sense a misery memoir.
Good.
Quite the opposite, actually. I mean, it's an optimistic and
well, it's got lots of fun in it.
It's full of, it has ups and downs, but it's a bright vision of the world. And you also, and I think this is very important, one of the points you make is that you don't, like, in contrast to a lot of people who've had difficult experiences, you don't claim to have any great lessons or insights to others.
Did you have Sky TV when you were
it wasn't invited, but it weren't invented where I were a boy, Matt.
I do want to ask though, because you do include some very harrowing details of your father's violence towards you, and you do include, not at great length, but your horrific experience of rape when you were 17. Right now, how did you come to decide I have to include that? Because the book could have been a brilliant read without them. They are powerful, honest, courageous passages in the book. I mean, I applaud you for them. But how did you come to the decision? Was it that you felt I have to portray the whole man, or candor, or what?
I'd written in part about my childhood before, about my dad, just because I think when I was in my 30s, I got to the stage where I thought, I should probably write about this thing. I'm a journalist and everything is copy.
Your dad's dead now, right?
Yeah. But I wrote about this when he was alive.
Yeah, right.
And so I thought, I can't just ignore that and I can't repeat it, so I need to go deeper. And I was prepared to do that. The rape and other aspects of the book basically came about because of my wife.
Yeah.
And because she didn't just say you've got to make this personal. She said you've got to say, tell people, and because it happened. And the reason I'd never written about the rape is because my response to it which I thought was a very successful response, I didn't think it was particularly helpful.
You didn't want to be defined by it?
No. It's not that. Because it didn't. I minimised it immediately.
Right.
It didn't define me. I wasn't really even in denial about it. I just shrugged it off, and I didn't. And because I'd been very successful at that, I didn't think that was particularly helpful to people for whom rape is usually a far more traumatic experience. It sounded flippant.
Can you, just for people will be listening thinking, can you tell us about the circumstances? Because
I was 17. I'd been out back from London. Was given a lift home by someone I knew, an acquaintance who's probably sort of maybe 15 years older. Plied with booze. I woke up and I was being raped. Yeah. And there was embarrassment. But I didn't tell many people about it. But I wasn't in trauma. And then perhaps, I've discussed this ad nauseum with my poor old therapist since then. But I think because I'd got used to shielding myself from when I did, because that I weirdly didn't consider to be abuse. Being punched in the face when you're a kid is abuse. But my therapist said, look, against all wisdom, if you can put things in boxes and you can keep the lid on, do it.
Is that why you put it?
Do it.
Is that why you put it towards the end of the book?
Yeah. So originally it was chronological,
right?
But I had to take it out because it just defines everything.
Right. Because then it's like that.
And again, by putting it at the back of the book, I was reinforcing the fact that it even though it happened, and I dealt with it in a particular way, in a way that I thought was successful, and it was successful. It didn't define the book, it didn't overshadow the book, and also I think minimised it in what I think is hopefully the right way.
It's interesting to me because you've written about people from all over the world, groups, whatever, But it seems to me that increasingly you've become a chronicler of Britain and Britishness and what it means. And, particularly in the recent books, the oral histories of the 80s and the 1995 book and so on. And I'm interested in what you think about where we are now, because a lot of the stuff you talk about, in ID, Arena, GQ, the sort of magnificence and glamour and fun of it all, and hard work, it's a very confident country, okay? It's a country that is overreaching itself. It's absolutely blasting on all cylinders. And determined to have a good time and do well and not be looked down upon. And now, I would say we're a less confident country. What's sort of the Dylan Jones calibration on all that?
I'm not sure I buy into that, because I think the successful culture that my life mirrors, and I've been lucky enough to grow up through, it's an adversity. If you look at the really powerful cultural moments of the last 40 years.
Interesting.
They're in spite of the what you call the optimism of the culture. There were elements of the 80s that were incredibly optimistic, but the flip side of that was degradation and horror, division, and kind of vicious poverty. What I think is different today is that. And I'm not one for saying my pop music's better than your pop music.
But it is though. But it obviously
I think you have to acknowledge that culture changes, and I think you also have to acknowledge that for lots of people who are 17 now, it's better than any of our culture. But I do think that the kind of insurrection, even if it's only cultural insurrection, or you think it's a kind of flippant insurrection, I don't think that's as powerful now as it was then. I don't. You talk about the country. I think in many respects the country is more positive than it's ever been, but I think it's minimised by everyone else. Politically, I don't think we're in a strong state at all, and I don't think we're about to be at all.
What's your take on what's happening right now with the election? And how do you think it's going to play out? And do you think that is going to be a good thing?
my view kind of chimes with most people's. I think there's a sense of inevitability about it. Everyone keeps saying, "Oh, it's good. We're going to have a bit of stability, a period of boredom." But I think the economic forecasts are grim because you've got the possibility of an incoming government who won't have any money to spend, and I think they will be punitive in terms of taxes. And I think you only had to look at West Streeting squirming on Sky TV this morning, who I got an awful lot of respect for, but you would have thought by this stage in the campaign that they would have had a kind of an immediate retort to that. But you can see it's a big issue for them because there will be taxes.
Yeah. No, we were saying only that.
Yeah.
I had one more, which is just a curiosity. You say one of the accidental but perhaps inevitable byproducts of aging, subject much on my mind, is finding out which cliches are actually true. And I just wondered which are.
All of them are true, Matt.
This is terrible because you're an enemy of cliche. I mean, I know, having been
Actually,
edited by you.
I'm an enemy of cliche in writing.
Yeah,
but in the grand scheme of things, cliches are cliches.
They became for a reason
because they're true.
They're true.
Yeah,
Parenthood being one of the most one of the most touching chapters of the book is your description of your description of meeting your wife Sarah, and then also lovely chapter about your two girls.
Well, that's nice. I wasn't quite sure how to approach the latter.
You had to, though. I mean,
oh yeah, of course I did. But I did it through humour because I thought that was the best way to do it. And also the fact that
listening to Paul Simon. What was it? Listening to Paul Simon's father and daughter.
Oh God, yeah. But I think that like a lot of men, I thought I was going to be trendy dad.
Yeah.
I really did. I thought
if
I was
you're
going to
not,
be trendy dad.
For God's sake, Dylan.
Dylan Jones
is
a trendy dad.
What's blue jeans
and what is the hope for the rest of us?
You're all doomed.
Is it? I mean, it's a very interesting question. Is it possible to be trendy dad? I mean,
no.
Is it? It's
of course not.
It's oxymoron, no. Isn't it?
They loved all the access,
Of course, yeah, that's different.
All of that stuff is great, but no, I mean, yeah. I remember
Ticketmaster provides great access, right?
Yeah, true. No, but I remember sitting in the kitchen once when that Drake song came on the radio, and I said, "This is a Timmy Thomas song." They go, "What?" I said, "It's based on a Timmy Thomas song." And you're talking about, and then I played it on Spotify, and they listened to it and said, "You're an idiot."
Well, I get this with Doors songs from my kids.
Yes.
And they put them on the radio, or on the radio.
On the wireless.
On Spotify.
This is the home program.
And then I'll start singing along, and they go, "Do you know this song?" Because they think it's new.
Of course they do.
Where did it?
But the
come
thing
from?
is, they're right.
Yeah,
no, that's the terrible thing.
No, and the other. I mean, it is a difficult thing. I remember. I think I've told this story before, but horrifying my poor elder son by tipping up at a Tyler the Creator concert that he was going to with his mates, and him saying to me, "What are you doing?" Right? And I said, "I've come to Tyler the Creator. This is very fashionable." Right? And afterwards, I thought, if my dad had turned up at the Smiths, I would have. I love my dad, but
not that much.
But really, Dad, what are you doing here? So I thought to myself, maybe it's time to. Time out. I'll make sure that if I am at the same gig, it's kind of.
But isn't that great? I mean, there is something great about the generation gap because.
I'm in favour of them.
Because for a while it was assumed that there was no generation gap.
Well, I mean, there are so many, and this is why, as much as I admire Taylor Swift, I can't be doing with it because it's like it is just a big family outing, right? But what I took from the Tyler the Creator experience, I came away, talk about scene, right? But also massively optimistic.
Yeah.
Because I thought it's about bloody time that there was some no-go zones, actually. I mean, obviously not being allowed to go in the go zone is not the fun bit. But in terms of the broader culture, it's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. You're completely right.
Well, listen, it's been fascinating. Thank you so much for
Thank
sparing
you.
time.
Buy this book.
The book
These
is out
Foolish
now.
Things.
Where did the title come from, apart from the song?
Oh, will you never let me be?
That was not
Good
an
God.
invitation.
Oh, will you never set me?
Everyone.
Where is Brian Ferry?
Ferry is in the
I've never seen you and Brian Ferry in the same place at the same time, and now I know why.
There's no escape that I can see.
Right, we've lost everyone now. Say what you want now.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you
It's
for
great.
coming in, Dylan.
Thanks,
See you
guys.
soon. Cheers. Well, that was fascinating.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
absolutely fascinating.
And I'm sure there'll be extra chapters as Dylan's career goes on.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would have thought this is just volume 1.
I hope so. Yeah. Right. I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation we've just had and the first half as well. Get any questions in, any feedback at all to 2matts@tnepublishing.com. That's the number 2, MATTS at tnepublishing.com. Or if you listen on Spotify, you can message us there. And that's exactly what Kate Lyle did, who says, presumably Matt was experiencing an involuntary time slip when he referred to the mailbag. Was that me, was it?
I don't know. I was too busy having an involuntary time slip. I forget.
Yeah, I keep talking about typewriters.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe we were stuck in the
wireless.
past.
We had the wireless. I mean,
we'll have loads more questions on Sunday. And, of course, a brand new episode of our very popular, by the way, I've seen lots and lots of people listening to it.
They love it.
Election specials. We'll have the third one of those on Monday. So if you've enjoyed this, please do tell a friend, a colleague, a loved one. Share the word. It really does help. And remember our subscription offer. If you love this podcast, you'll adore The New European. So go to theneweuropean.co.uk/2mats. There's a link in the show notes. And you can get the best subscription offer available. Thanks as ever to producer Matt Hill at Rethink Audio, and until Monday,
it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.